I didn't notice the world ending at first. That's the thing about disasters. They don't announce themselves. They slip in quietly, disguised as inconvenience, confusion, and the kind of morning you think you've had before. It started with noise. Not screams, not explosions, just sirens. Too many of them, too far apart to make sense of as a single event, but close enough that my brain refused to ignore them. I remember standing in my kitchen, coffee halfway to my mouth, staring out through the blinds at the street below my apartment in Sydney. Traffic was still moving. People were still walking dogs. A jogger even paused at the corner to fix his shoe like nothing in the universe had changed. But the sirens kept coming. Then came the first broadcast interruption. My TV flickered mid-weather report. The presenter's face froze, then vanished into a government emergency symbol. This is an emergency health advisory. All residents are instructed to remain indoors. Do not approach individuals exhibiting aggressive or disoriented behavior. Repeat, remain indoors. I laughed, out loud, not because it was funny, but because it felt so absurdly generic. Aggressive behavior? That could mean anything. Drugs, a protest, a bad flu season, I took another sip of coffee. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number, text message. Do not go outside. Do not open doors for anyone. If someone is bleeding from the mouth or eyes, do not approach. I frowned. Now, that was specific and unsettling. I opened my balcony door. That was my first mistake. The air felt wrong. Not physically, nothing you could point at. It was more like the world had lost its rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm kept going long after anyone would normally care to stop it. A dog barked nonstop from a unit 2 buildings over. And beneath it all, there was a low, irregular shouting that didn't sound like arguing. It sounded like chasing. I leaned on the railing. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was a street fight near the corner store. 3 people clustered around another, jerking and pushing in chaotic bursts. Then I saw the way one of them moved too stiff, too sudden, like broken machinery forcing itself forward. The victim fell. The others didn't stop. One of them bent down. Another followed. There was no hesitation, no awareness of anything except the body on the ground. My stomach tightened. A man walked past them. Just walked. Headphones in, eyes forward, not seeing. One of the attackers turned and ran at him. Fast. The man barely had time to turn before it collided with him. They both went down hard on the asphalt. That's when I noticed the biting. Not punching, not restraining, biting. My coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the balcony floor. Inside my head, something tried to label what I was seeing and failed. This wasn't a fight. This was something else. I stepped backward into my apartment and locked the balcony door. My hands were shaking. I grabbed my phone again. News alerts were flooding in now, one after another. Inconsistent reports. Medical outbreak, violent contamination event, unidentified infection causing aggressive neurological response. Neurological response. That phrase stuck because it sounded like science trying not to say dead people are getting up again. Another siren passed overhead, closer this time. Then a sound outside my building made me freeze. A scream. Not distant. Not muffled. Right below my window. I moved slowly, cautiously, to the front of the apartment. Looked down. A woman was running across the courtyard, barefoot. She was bleeding from her arm, but that wasn't what made my chest tighten. It was what was chasing her. Maybe once a man staggered after her with uneven, snapping movements. His jaw hung slightly open. His skin was pale, in a way that didn't look like illness. It looked like absence. He didn't run like a human. He lunged. She reached the gate, slammed into it, fumbled with the latch. He grabbed her hair. She screamed again, and this time I heard it break into something raw and animal. I backed away from the window. My brain was trying to rationalize it. Drugs, mass hysteria, some experimental pathogen escaping a lab. Something explainable. But none of those explanations accounted for what I saw next. She fell. He bent down and began to bite. I pressed my back against the wall. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too thin, like the outside world could seep through the cracks if it tried hard enough. My phone rang. This time it was my sister. I answered immediately. "Emma?" Her voice came in fast, shaking. "Are you inside?" "Yes, what's going on?" "I don't know. People are attacking each other, like animals. The hospital's full. They said not to come in unless you're already infected, but they won't define what that means, and—" A crash interrupted her. "Emma?" I said again. "I have to go," she whispered. "Someone's at the door. Don't open it." A scream cut her off. Then the line went dead. Silence hit harder than noise ever could. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. Then came the knock. Not at my door. Down the hall. Slow, deliberate, followed by dragging footsteps. Something scraped along the carpet outside my apartment door. I stepped backward instinctively, eyes locked on it. The handle twitched. Once. Twice. Not urgent, not frantic. Testing. I didn't breathe. The scratching stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then, very softly, something on the other side made a wet, broken sound, like a breath that didn't belong to anything alive anymore. And it spoke. Not words, just a low, guttural sound that scraped through the door like it was trying to remember how language worked. I realized then, fully and completely, that whatever was happening outside wasn't spreading slowly anymore. It was already here, right outside my door. I backed into the kitchen without taking my eyes off the hallway entrance. My survival instincts weren't screaming yet. They were just waking up. And I knew deep down that whatever I did next would decide whether I made it through the first day or didn't make it past the first hour. The sound at my door didn't repeat right away. That was almost worse. Silence gave my imagination room to grow teeth. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the hallway entrance like it might suddenly decide to open on its own. My apartment suddenly felt like a thin shell around something fragile. I forced myself to move. First instinct, lock everything again. Second instinct, check the door. Third instinct, louder than both, was, don't be stupid enough to open it. I backed into the bedroom instead. It had the only solid furniture I could think of using as a barricade, a heavy dresser and a bed frame that didn't move easily. My hands worked without fully waiting for my thoughts to catch up. My body was starting to act like it understood something my mind was still arguing with. Another scrape hit the front door. Closer this time. Then a dull thud. Not a knock. A body bumping into it. I froze. The building outside was old, concrete heavy, the kind of place where you could usually ignore your neighbors entirely. Now I could hear everything like it was happening inside my own skull. A second impact hit the door, then dragging. Something was sliding along the hallway carpet again, slower now, like it had lost interest in standing properly. My phone was still in my hand. No signal. Just emergency alerts stuck on loop. One of them had changed now. Stay indoors. Avoid physical contact with infected individuals. Do not attempt evacuation unless instructed. Infected. They'd chosen a word. That meant they knew enough to name it. That meant it was already too late. A third impact hit the door harder. The handle rattled. I moved automatically, grabbing the heaviest things I owned. The dresser groaned as I dragged it across the floor. Wood scraping tile sounded like gunfire in the silence. I stacked it against the bedroom doorway, then shoved my desk in front of it. It wasn't much, but it was something. Another sound came from the hallway. Not a thud this time. A wet exhale. Close enough now that I could hear individual movements. A shifting, a dragging foot. Something brushing the door like fingernails. Except too slow, too uneven. I backed away until I hit the bedroom wall. My breathing was too loud. That's when I heard a second set of footsteps. Further down the hall. Faster. Human. A voice followed. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please help me." A man, maybe mid-30s, panicked. My first instinct was relief. My second was suspicion. The footsteps stopped near my door. "Hey," he called. "Open up. There's one of them right behind me." A pause. Then my door rattled again, but differently. Not the slow testing from before. This was urgent, fear-driven. "Please," he shouted. "It got my girlfriend. Jesus Christ just opened the door." My mouth went dry. Every instinct I had screamed at me not to respond. But I also knew something else. People didn't fake that kind of panic easily. Another thud hit the door from the outside hallway monster. The man outside yelled and stumbled back. "I can hear it. Please, I just need somewhere." A sound cut him off. Not a scream. A gurgle. Then a crash, like he'd fallen into the wall. And then something heavier moved. Slow. The same wet breathing. My stomach tightened. The man outside wasn't at my door anymore. Something else was. I closed my eyes for half a second, just long enough to regret it. This wasn't happening outside anymore. This was happening in my building. The hallway lights flickered through the gap under my door. A shadow moved across it, then stopped. It was directly in front of me. Still, listening. I slowly lowered myself to the floor, trying to stay out of sight of the bottom gap. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to press them against my thighs to stop the noise. The scratching started again. This time, at my door frame. Not testing. Searching. Like it could smell something inside. I looked around my bedroom quickly. No weapons. Nothing obvious. Kitchen knife. That was it. I moved as quietly as I could, slipped back into the kitchen, and opened the drawer. My fingers closed around the largest knife I owned. It felt wrong in my hand. Too light to matter. Too small to be useful. Another scratch at the door. Then a pause. Then something bumped the door again, harder this time, as if whatever was outside had lost patience. The wood shuddered slightly. I backed into the corner of the kitchen, knife raised without meaning to. My brain finally caught up enough to think one clear thought. If it gets in, I don't survive this. As if in response, the hallway went quiet. No scratching. No movement. Just silence. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. A minute. Nothing. Then, softly, the handle moved. Not forcefully. Just a slow, testing turn. Locked. Another pause. Then a sound I'll never forget. A head pressing against the door. Not knocking. Just leaning. Listening from the other side. I could hear, breathing now. Broken. Irregular. Too close. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. And then, unexpectedly, it stopped again. The pressure lifted. Footsteps retreated. Slowly. Dragging. Down the hallway. Away from me. I didn't move. Not even after the silence stretched for minutes. Only when I was absolutely certain the hallway was empty did I allow myself to breathe again. But the relief didn't last. Because somewhere below me, in the building, something screamed. Not human. Not quite animal. Something collapsing under its own broken instincts. Then another scream answered it. And another. Like a chain reaction spreading floor by floor. The infection wasn't just outside. It was inside the building now. I looked at my apartment like it had changed shape. Like it was no longer a home, but a temporary hiding place that had already been found. My phone buzzed again. One new message. No number. Just text. Do not use elevators. Stay quiet. They respond to sound. I stared at it. They. That word confirmed it. This wasn't just chaos anymore. It was organized enough to be understood, or at least categorized. From outside my apartment, the hallway light flickered again. A shadow passed by my door, but it didn't stop this time. It kept moving, slow, searching, and I realized something that made my stomach sink deeper than fear alone could explain. Whatever was out there wasn't random anymore. It was learning where people were, and it had just decided my building was worth checking floor by floor. The next hour didn't feel like time passing. It felt like pressure building. Every sound in the building sharpened into something meaningful. Pipes groaning, distant doors opening and closing, the occasional thud that could have been furniture or a body hitting the ground. My brain stopped trying to categorize everything and just started storing it as threat noise. I stayed in the kitchen corner for a long time without moving. The knife never left my hand. Eventually, I forced myself to think again. Staying here wasn't a plan. It was a delay. The building was compromised. That much was clear. Whatever they were, whatever that message meant, they were inside. Floor by floor, room by room. I needed an exit. I moved slowly to the window in the living room. Kept low, kept quiet. My apartment was on the 6th floor, overlooking the back alley and a narrow service lane between buildings. I pulled the curtain just enough to look out. The alley below was wrong. Not empty, not safe. Just abandoned in a way that felt abrupt, like the world had stopped caring about it mid-use. A tipped-over garbage bin, a scooter lying on its side, a faint smear of something dark near the drain. No people, at least not moving ones. But I saw movement further down the lane, a figure staggering between shadows, jerking like it couldn't decide where to go next. It bumped into a wall, paused, then turned in a slow, searching circle. Another one joined it a moment later, then another. They weren't running. Not anymore. They were spreading out like they had all the time in the world. That was the part that made my chest tighten. No urgency, no panic, just persistence. I backed away from the window. Fire escape. That was my only option. The building had one at the far end of the hallway, past 8 apartments. If the hallway was clear, if I could reach it and get down without crossing the street-level chaos. But if was doing a lot of heavy lifting. I checked my phone again. No service. Battery, 68%. Useless unless I got lucky. From somewhere in the building came a loud crash glass breaking, followed by a scream that cut off halfway through like someone had slammed a door on it. I couldn't stay. I moved to my apartment door and pressed my ear against it. Silence. Too much silence. That was almost worse than noise. Slowly, I unlocked it. Every click sounded like a gunshot in my head. I waited. Nothing immediately responded. I cracked the door open just a few centimeters. The hallway smelled wrong. Not rot. Not exactly. More like stale air mixed with something metallic, like someone had left iron out in the sun too long. The lights flickered again. The hallway stretched left and right, long, narrow, identical doors on both sides. Empty. For now. I slipped out. Barefoot. Quiet. Knife in hand. I kept close to the wall, moving past the first apartment. The silence pressed in harder the further I went from my own door. Every step felt like it might trigger something hiding just beyond hearing range. Halfway down the hall, I saw the first body. It was lying near apartment 612, face down, still. For a moment, I thought it was dead. Then it moved. A slow arm drag, fingernails scraping carpet. It wasn't standing up. It was orienting itself, like it was waking up and remembering gravity. I froze. It didn't look at me. Not yet. I backed up slowly, step by step, keeping my breathing shallow. It turned its head slightly, not enough to see me, but enough to listen. I realized then something I hadn't fully accepted before. They didn't need sight. They were tracking differently. Sound, movement, maybe something else. I stayed still. Seconds stretched. The figure's head tilted again. Then it pushed itself forward, dragging its body along the floor with slow, deliberate motion. Not fast. Not chaotic. Certain. I slipped past it while it was angled away, hugging the opposite wall, barely breathing. I didn't run. Running would have been louder than screaming. 3 more doors down, I saw another one standing in front of apartment 608. This one wasn't lying down. It was upright, motionless, facing the wall, just standing there, waiting. I couldn't tell if it was listening or simply idle. I passed it slowly. Halfway past, it twitched. A small movement in the shoulder. Then its head began to turn. I didn't wait. I moved faster, still controlled, but urgent now. A scrape sounded behind me. Not a shout, not a roar. Just recognition. It knew I was there. I reached the fire escape door at the end of the hall. Locked. Of course. I exhaled through my nose, forcing my hands to stay steady as I tried the handle again. Metal. Heavy. No movement. Behind me, something dragged across carpet. Closer. I checked the door frame. Old lock system. Weak hinge point. My brain did something I didn't expect. It stopped panicking and started calculating. Kitchen knife. Useless for brute force. But there was a fire axe behind glass in most of these buildings. Maintenance safety requirement. I turned and moved quickly to the wall cabinet just outside the fire escape door. Glass box. Red axe inside. The first hit cracked it. The second shattered it. The sound echoed down the hallway like a gunshot. Bad. Very bad. A scream answered somewhere behind me. I grabbed the axe. Heavy. Grounding in a way the knife never was. I swung back to the fire escape door and brought the axe down on the latch. Metal screamed. Another strike. The lock gave way. Behind me, footsteps dragging, fastening into something like urgency. I pushed the door open and stepped into the stairwell. Cold air hit me immediately. The stairwell was dim, lit only by emergency lights that flickered like dying pulses. Down was dark. Up was worse. Movement above. I heard it immediately. Something pacing on the upper landing. Slow. Waiting. I chose down. I took the stairs 2 at a time, axe tight in both hands. The building around me felt like it was waking up fully now. Sounds echoed differently here, amplified, distorted. Every footstep, above or below, felt like it belonged to something trying to find me through sound alone. Halfway down the stairwell, I heard it. A voice. From a floor above. Hello? Human. Male. Weak. My grip tightened instinctively. Is someone there? The voice called again. Please, I think I'm injured. I hesitated. That hesitation almost killed me. Because from somewhere above him, something answered. Not speaking. Not human. A wet, dragging sound. Then the voice above changed immediately. Then movement. I backed down the stairs quickly, heart hammering again. The stairwell behind me echoed with a sudden impact, something hitting concrete hard enough to shake dust loose. I didn't look up. I kept going down, because whatever was happening above was no longer my problem. But I realized something as I reached the lower floors. The building wasn't just infected. It was being hunted internally. And I had no idea who or what was doing the hunting. The lower I went, the worse the building felt. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was rhythm. Like the entire structure had developed a heartbeat made of violence and confusion. Every floor I passed added a new layer. Distant shouting, something glass breaking, a door slamming so hard it echoed like a gunshot. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, I realized I wasn't alone in the stairwell anymore. Not because I saw someone, because I heard breathing that didn't match mine. Above me, then below me. A slow, uneven pattern, like something trying to imitate human respiration without fully understanding it. I stopped on the landing between floors. A mistake. The stairwell lights flickered, and for half a second, everything was swallowed in shadow. That was when I saw movement on the landing below. A figure stood there, facing away. Still. Too still. I tightened my grip on the axe. It didn't move. I stepped down 1 stair. It didn't react. Another step. The figure shifted slightly. Not turning. Just adjusting. Like it had sensed me without needing confirmation. I backed up immediately, moving back up the stairs toward the 3rd floor landing. The moment my foot hit the concrete, the figure below jerked its head upward. Not slowly this time. Fast. Too fast. It locked onto me. And then it moved. Not like running. Like collapsing forward into motion. I turned and ran. The stairwell exploded behind me with sound footsteps hitting concrete in uneven, aggressive bursts. Whatever it wasn't climbing like a human anymore. It was using momentum, hands scraping rails, feet skipping steps entirely. I burst through the 3rd floor door into the corridor, and immediately regretted it. The hallway here was worse than mine. Doors open, lights off. Something dragged across the floor, leaving a dark streak that I refused to identify. A smell hit me then, strong enough to make my throat tighten. Blood, old and fresh, mixed together. A scream came from somewhere behind one of the doors. Not a full scream, just the end of one, cut off too quickly. The stairwell door behind me slammed open. I didn't think. I ran. Down the hallway. A shape burst out behind me fast, low, uneven. I heard nails scraping tile, a guttural sound that didn't belong to anything that should still be using lungs. I reached the fire escape junction on this floor and slammed into the door. Locked. Of course. My axe came down hard. Once. Twice. The wood around the lock splintered. Behind me, the sound closed in. Closer. The door gave. I threw myself through into the stairwell again, barely catching my balance as I hit the steps. I went down 3 flights in what felt like seconds. My lungs burned. My hands shook, but I kept the axe tight. The ground floor door loomed ahead like salvation. Exit sign flickering above it. I hit it with my shoulder. It didn't open. Locked. Barricaded from the other side. Of course it was. Something slammed into the stairwell above. Closer now. Very close. I turned to the side and looked at the glass panel beside the exit door. Emergency brake glass. Fire safety hammer inside. I raised the axe and smashed it. Glass exploded outward. I grabbed the hammer, turned back to the door, and hit the lock mechanism. Metal cracked. Not enough. Behind me, the stairwell filled with sound. Multiple sounds now. Not just one. More than one set of footsteps. I hit the door again. The lock finally snapped. The door swung open, and I stepped into the ground floor lobby. For a fraction of a second, it looked normal. Reception desk, mailboxes, a couch tipped slightly on one side. Then I saw the bodies. 3 near the entrance, 1 behind the desk, 1 halfway to the elevators. All still, but not peaceful. I didn't stop. I moved toward the main exit doors. Glass sliding doors. Beyond them, daylight. Street-level chaos. A car had crashed into the curb outside. Smoke rising. Distant screams echoing down the street like ripples from a stone dropped in water. I reached the doors, and they didn't open. Power out. Of course. Manual override panel. Behind the reception desk. I moved fast. That's when one of the bodies behind the desk shifted. I froze. Slowly, it sat up, its head tilted toward me. Its face was wrong in a way that wasn't immediately visible, but deeply unsettling once you noticed it. Not damage, not injury. Rearrangement. Like expression no longer mattered. It stood. I backed away, gripping the axe. It took 1 step. Behind it, the second body moved. Then the third. I was no longer in a lobby. I was in a room where things were waking up. I ran behind the desk, slammed my hand into the emergency override panel. Red light. Power failure. Manual release needed. I hit it again. Nothing. Behind me, footsteps closed in. I swung the axe blindly over the counter. It connected with something soft. A crash. A fall. I didn't look. I slammed the panel a 3rd time. A loud mechanical clunk echoed through the lobby. The doors unlocked. I sprinted. The glass doors slid open just enough for me to slip through, and I was outside. Air hit me like a physical shock. Noise everywhere. Cars abandoned mid-road. People running in clusters. Some fighting. Some falling. Some not getting back up. And scattered among them were things that moved wrong. Too fast in bursts. Too slow in pauses. Not coordinated, but persistent. I stepped onto the street. And for the first time since it started, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think. This wasn't a contained outbreak. It wasn't a building problem. It wasn't even a city problem. It was already everywhere. A scream cut across the street. I turned and saw a man running directly toward me. bleeding from his arm, eyes wide. "Help me!" he shouted. Behind him, something followed. But I didn't look closely enough to see what, because the moment I hesitated, the world changed again. A siren overhead stopped abruptly. A loud broadcast crackled through every nearby speaker system, and a calm voice said, "Containment failure confirmed across multiple zones. Military response initiated. All civilians are instructed to avoid contact with infected individuals and proceed to designated quarantine evacuation points." Then a pause, a longer one, like whoever was speaking didn't want to say the next part. Then, "Do not attempt to rescue family members." The message repeated. The street outside the building wasn't chaos anymore. It was pattern. That was the first thing I noticed once I stopped running and actually looked. People still screamed, still fled, still crashed into cars and each other, but it wasn't random. There were lanes forming in the panic, like invisible boundaries were being respected without anyone consciously deciding to respect them. Crowds split around certain points in the street, as if something was directing flow without ever stepping into view. I stood just outside the glass doors of my apartment building, axe still in my hand, breathing too hard, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The man who had been running toward me, bleeding arm, desperate eyes, was gone. Not fallen. Gone. I scanned the street. That's when I saw them. Not it. Not a single thing. Them. 3 figures standing near the intersection. They didn't move like the infected. They didn't move like survivors either. They stood too still, too balanced, like they were waiting for instructions that didn't need words. One of them raised an arm, slightly, not waving, not signaling, just a small motion. And something in the crowd reacted. A group of people turned as one and started moving down a side street. Not all of them. Just enough. Like a herd being split. My grip tightened on the axe. My mind immediately tried to force a rational explanation. Military, police coordination, remote crowd control, maybe drones, speakers, something hidden in the environment. But nothing I knew about crowd behavior matched what I was seeing. A woman stumbled near the curb, clutching her shoulder, crying. She looked directly at one of the standing figures and froze. Not in fear. In recognition. That was worse. She whispered something I couldn't hear, then turned and walked away from the main road without being touched. Just redirected. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't infection spreading blindly anymore. This was guidance. Control. I backed up slightly toward the building entrance. A mistake. The moment I moved, one of the figures turned its head toward me. Not fully. Just enough. And the street changed again. The infected, those jerky, broken moving things, shifted direction. Not all of them, but enough. A few began moving toward the building. Toward me. I stepped back inside instinctively, letting the glass doors close halfway behind me. My breathing sounded too loud again. The axe felt heavier now. Outside, the nearest infected slowed as they approached the entrance. They didn't rush. They didn't attack immediately. They gathered, like they were waiting for permission. That was the moment the broadcast changed again. A loudspeaker mounted somewhere on a nearby building crackled to life, even though the power grid was clearly failing everywhere else. "Civilian evacuation protocol active," the same calm voice announced. "Proceed to marked quarantine corridors. Do not resist containment personnel." Containment personnel. My eyes snapped back to the figures on the street. They hadn't moved closer, but they were definitely watching. Something in my chest went cold. I stepped fully back into the lobby. The infected that had followed me from inside the building were still there near the entrance, moving slowly now, circling like they had forgotten what they were doing but not why they were there. Then one of them stopped. It turned its head toward the glass, toward the street figures, and froze. Then, in a movement that made my skin crawl, it turned around and walked away from me, back into the building corridors, like it had been reassigned. My mouth went dry. That shouldn't have been possible. Infected didn't retreat. They didn't hesitate. They didn't reorganize. Unless something was directing them. I looked again at the figures outside. One of them raised its hand slightly, and all movement in the immediate area shifted. Not stopped. Shifted. Like gravity had changed direction for a moment. I realized something then that made my pulse spike in my throat. They weren't just controlling infected. They were controlling routes, crowd movement, human decision-making at scale, evacuation corridors, quarantine channels. Everything was being guided into predictable paths. And I was standing outside one of them. A low hum passed through the street, not audible, like pressure in the air. The infected near the entrance suddenly stopped again. All of them, perfect synchronization. Then they turned, not toward me, not toward the street, toward the same direction, east, down the road, and began walking, not rushing, not stumbling, walking, like they had somewhere to be. I took a slow step back into the lobby. Something was fundamentally wrong with what I was seeing. This wasn't collapse. It was restructuring. And I was beginning to suspect that the infection wasn't the thing in control. It was just the visible part. My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket. I nearly dropped it. One new message. Unknown number. Again. But this time, longer. You are outside designated flow routes. Return to corridor or be classified as non-compliant. My skin went cold. Classified. Not infected. Not victim. Non-compliant. I looked back outside. The three figures were closer now than they had been before. I hadn't seen them move, but they were closer. One of them tilted its head slightly, and I felt very clearly that I had been observed the entire time I was reading the message. My instincts screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to run to anymore, because the streets weren't random. They were mapped, and I was standing outside the map. A loud crash echoed from behind me inside the building. Something had broken through the stairwell doors. The infected inside were no longer contained. They were coming down. I was trapped between two systems now. The uncontrolled collapse inside and the controlled evacuation outside, neither of which looked safe, and both of which seemed to be moving toward the same outcome. I tightened my grip on the axe and realized, with a sinking certainty I didn't want to accept. I wasn't trying to survive an outbreak. I was trying to survive being sorted. The first time I understood I was being steered, not just threatened, was when the building behind me stopped sounding like chaos. Not quiet, not calm, reorganized. The infected inside weren't screaming anymore. They weren't crashing into walls or stumbling blindly down corridors. The noise changed into something eerily structured footsteps, moving in clusters, occasional impacts that sounded less like panic and more like compliance. Like something had been switched on. I stood in the lobby doorway, axe in hand, caught between two impossible choices. Outside, the three figures remained near the intersection. Inside, the building was waking up into something that no longer resembled a place where people lived. And in both directions, Movement was becoming intentional. A sudden crack of glass snapped my attention back inside. The stairwell door at the far end of the lobby burst open. Not violently like before. Precisely. Like it had been opened with purpose rather than force. A group of infected stepped into view. 4 of them. Then 5. They didn't rush me. They didn't spread out. They formed a loose line, facing the entrance, as if waiting for alignment. My mind tried to reject the pattern forming in front of me, but it was too consistent now to ignore. Something was synchronizing them. Not all at once. Gradually, layer by layer. A system replacing instinct. Outside, one of the figures raised its hand again, and the infected inside the lobby all turned their heads slightly, just slightly, toward the same point. My chest tightened. They weren't reacting to me. I was irrelevant. They were reacting to signals I couldn't perceive properly. Then the phone in my hand vibrated again. This time, it didn't feel like a message. It felt like confirmation. Non-compliant subject detected. Location stabilized. I stared at it. Stabilized. Not found. Not tracked. Stabilized. Like I was a variable being fixed in place. A sound came from outside the building. Not a scream. Not sirens. A low, overlapping tone. Like multiple speakers broadcasting the same message, slightly out of sync. The infected in the lobby shifted again. All of them. One step forward. Unified. I realized then something that made my stomach drop lower than fear. They weren't just being controlled. They were being trained. And I was part of the training environment. A test condition. A variable outside expected behavior. The 3 figures outside finally moved. Slowly. They crossed the street. Not running. Not cautious. Certain. The infected near the entrance parted slightly as they approached the glass doors. Not breaking them. Not resisting. Making space. My breathing turned shallow. One of the figures stopped just outside the glass. It tilted its head toward me, and I felt something I can only describe as a tension without eyes. Then, inside my head, not through sound, not through speech, but through recognition, I understood something that didn't belong in my own thoughts. Returned to flow. I stumbled back instinctively. The axe felt suddenly useless. Not because it was weak, because it was irrelevant. The infected inside the lobby took another synchronized step, then another. They weren't coming at me anymore. They were passing me, flowing around me, like I was an obstacle in a designed path, and I understood the horror of it. The infection wasn't the end of civilization. It was the transition system, a way to remove unpredictability, to convert chaos into direction. Outside, the figure raised its hand again, and the infected behind me inside the building began moving past me toward the doors. Not attacking, not hesitating, ignoring me completely, as if I had already been classified out of relevance. My mind raced. If I ran outside, I'd be absorbed into the flow. If I stayed inside, I'd be swept by whatever was reorganizing the building. Either way, I wasn't outside the system. I was just between its layers. Then I noticed something on the street beyond the glass. A convoy. Not military vehicles. Not ambulances. Unmarked transport units moving slowly down the road in a perfectly spaced formation. They didn't honk. They didn't rush. They aligned with the flow of infected and civilians being directed into side streets. This wasn't evacuation. It was collection. And that's when I saw the final detail that shattered the last illusion I had left. On the side of one of the passing vehicles, faintly visible through cracked paint and grime, was a symbol I recognized from early emergency broadcasts. The same symbol that had appeared in the first alert, the same calm voice. But now it was stamped on the machinery, moving through the city like a quiet authority no one had questioned enough at the start. It wasn't a response to the outbreak. It was part of it. Or worse, it had been waiting for it. The figure outside the glass leaned slightly closer, and I finally understood what the message on my phone had really meant. Non-compliant subject detected. Location stabilized. Not captured. Not contained. Stabilized. Like a system correcting an anomaly. Inside the lobby, the infected passed me in steady streams toward the exit. None of them touched me. None of them acknowledged me. I was no longer prey. I was no longer even resistance. I was something outside classification briefly tolerated until a new directive arrived. My grip on the axe loosened slightly. Not from relief. From realization. There was no survival route here. Only compliance routes. And I had just been given one final choice. Step into the flow, or become something the system would eventually correct. Outside, the convoy slowed. A door on one of the vehicles opened, and for the first time since Day Zero began, I saw something that wasn't infected, wasn't panicked, and wasn't running. A person, standing calmly, waiting, like they expected me to join them. And I realized the worst truth of all. The apocalypse hadn't broken control of the world. It had replaced who was in control.